Just 1 year. Just 1 year. I just want the Mets to win once. Every year. Braves win the. Oh, sorry. Sitting here, trying to get over the fact that the Atlanta Braves are World Series champions. On today's episode of Locked On Mets, gonna talk about how the Mets blew it, how the Braves are champs, and why it's really frustrating for a longtime Mets fan. Roll the music.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans who are listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Now we got to talk about it, folks. The Atlanta Braves won the World Series. The New York Mets had a stranglehold on this division. They let it slip. The Braves swoop right in, win the division, and then go on a crazy run through the playoffs and win the World Series. In the first segment of today's show, I'm going to talk about the frustration right now for Mets fans as once again you have to sit on the sidelines and watch the Braves not only make the playoffs, but then suddenly have this great string of success in the playoffs that really has eluded them throughout their franchise's history. We'll go through that in the second segment. I'm going to play a clip from our Locked On MLB insider, Gordon Beckham, where he talks about the moves that the Braves made at the deadline. And then I'll react and see how this translates to what the Mets did at the deadline. There's this narrative right now that's out that the Mets blew the deadline, the Braves didn't, and that's why they're ahead. I want to go through why that is not necessarily the case, how the Mets did not necessarily blow the deadline. They just didn't have a good enough team, and the Braves were able to create a championship culture in the second half. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at FinkelsteinRyan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets and about baseball at justbaseball.com. So, let's just get to the obvious here. The Atlanta Braves have been kicking ass in the NL East for my entire lifetime. I was actually just looking today at how many division titles the Braves have won. They've won 16 in my 26 years of life. And I was like, all right, let me go back. I'm going to tweet something out about how when I was born, how many days after it was where the Braves won their first NL East title, because that came in 1995, which was also the last year that they won a World Series prior to 2021. So to my surprise, I'm looking it up and I see that it was September 14th, 1995 that the Braves clinched their first NL East title. They used to be in the West. They end up in the East and they clinch it on my original birthday. I mean, tell me that's not just a prophecy for the life of a tortured Mets fan that happened the day I came onto this earth. And then I've had to sit back and watch the Braves win this division damn near every single year since. 16 out of 26 years for one team in a division where there's supposed to be a whole slate of 5 teams competing for that division. And the Mets, they've won the NL East twice, 2006 and 2015. So when you're sitting here the day after the World Series ends, as I'm recording this show, it is incredibly frustrating. And you look at what makes this year so painful. It's because it was supposed to be the start of a new. We weren't supposed to be talking at this stage of the year about a new front office and getting a new manager and trying to figure out a way to establish a culture. That was supposed to happen when Steve Cohen came in. And this is not a knock on Cohen. We set way too high, unrealistic expectations, partially due to, the narrative that they tried to construct, but also we had to understand that it's very hard to microwave a World Series contender. But at the same time, you look at the trade deadline. The Mets, 8 games over 500. The Braves, 2 games under. The Mets, a 5-game lead in the division. What happens from that point on? Well, the Braves go 36-19 to close out the season. The Mets go 21-37. And so as much as we're going to talk about the trade deadline and the moves that could have been made and would have been made and the great moves that the Braves made, if you really dive into it, this is not about Adam Duvall and Eddie Rosario and all the home runs they hit and Jorge Soler. They were great, and they were great in the playoffs. Soler, World Series MVP. That's great. Go to Locked On Braves and hear all about how awesome they were. But what this comes down to is the New York Mets, they never put their foot down on the throat of the Atlanta Braves. And I talked about this throughout the first half. There was always this notion from Pete Alonso and others that, hey, we're in first place. We're fine. Calm down with the panic alarms about the offense. Calm down about talking about where we stand in the division. We'll get him tomorrow. We'll get him tomorrow. Oh, we didn't finish the sweep. That's fine. We lost this series, but we won the next one. It's going to be okay, right? Well, you keep doing that and you let a team like the Braves say, you know what, the Mets aren't that good because the Mets weren't that good. And that is the thing that is frustrating is now there's this revisionist history that the Mets didn't do enough at the deadline. And we're going to get into that. But it's the guys that were on the roster, man. You can't replace the entire team. You can't create a winning culture just by putting in one or two pieces. The Braves, they had Freddie Freeman there. They had Ozzie Alsby, Dansby Swanson, all these guys that, regardless of how experienced some of them are, even Austin Riley to a certain extent, right, who had a great second half. They had guys that had won the division before, that knew what it took to win, and knew that it's a long season. They never gave up. They were able to, with the backbone of a really good pitching staff, develop an identity in the second half, get better week over week, month over month, and turn themselves into a great contender when they did get that little jolt of energy. The Mets got plenty of energy from Javier Baez. He was arguably, based on the numbers, the best deadline acquisition for a single player. He was sensational, but that one little spark, if there's nothing else going on behind him, if you still have a team where a Dominic Smith and a Jeff McNeil just can't get out of their own way in the second half, and Brandon Nimmo continues to lead the lineup with little injuries and all the different things that piled up, it doesn't matter what the Mets would have wanted to, or would have could have done at the deadline. I'm flustered. What can I say? I'm frustrated. It really doesn't though. It comes down to the fact that the Braves believed that they had a chance at the deadline. Alex Anthopoulos believed in his team and went for it. And I don't think that Zach Scott went for it maybe in the right way, but at the same time, you can't knock the individual moves. What you have to look at is the collective effort of the two teams. And as great as all the additions were, it was the incumbents on the Braves that made the Braves a team that just needed a spark here and a spark there to go from being a 500 team to a team that was rolling in the second half. And once they had that belief, once they saw the Mets falter, they didn't look back. And you know what else they did? They capitalized playing all the other bad teams in the National League, where the Mets let those bad teams get wins off of them. The Mets went to Miami for 4 games and lost 3. The Mets continued to struggle series over series. And it all goes back to the first half of the season where we saw these warts, but we looked at the rest of the division and we said, none of these teams are going to believe in themselves. None of these teams are going to get back in it. And at the end of the day, by leaving that door cracked and not slamming it shut in the first half, you allowed the Braves to bust through that door and ultimately become World Series champions. We're going to talk a little bit about the trade deadline more in just a bit. Going to play a clip from our Locked On MLB insider, Gordon Beckham. I'll react to that and whether the Mets really did blow the deadline or if the Braves just found the perfect recipe in that second half. BetOnline is back and better than ever. Now featuring a new web interface for the start of the basketball season with more props, odds, and lines available than ever before. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the basketball and football action this season. Head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit just by using our promo code Locked On. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts.
You've covered this team, the Braves, throughout the year. Can you kind of lay out, this wasn't the team that they were in the midsummer around July. So kind of how did Atlanta become the team that won the World Series?
Right. So I spent some time covering this team. I did some pre and post games for them. I was around their clubhouse and understood kind of how they were ticking. And I was covering the team at the end of July. And I basically, people were asking me, what do you think? And I'm like, I just don't think they're a playoff team. Now, this is before they basically made all the trades. I think they had traded for Jock Peterson at that point, but they hadn't made the trade for Soler, Rosario, or Duvall at that point. And so it just, they were not a team. And I, speaking to Brian Snicker the other day in the NLCS, he's just said, listen, we weren't a playoff team. And then all of a sudden we got these other guys into the lineup and it was just a different team. So the reason that the Braves won the World Series is because of those trades. I mean, there is no doubt about it. Their pitching staff remained basically the same. I mean, they had the same guys that for most of the year and their pitching staff that made it happen. But their outfield changed the game and is the reason they won the World Series, because without these guys, I mean, you just look back at all the things that Rosario did, Peterson did, Duvall had some big games, and then Soler in the World Series. I mean, these guys are the reason they won the World Series. I mean, Freddie Freeman had a great series, he had a great playoffs, but he's not the reason they won the World Series. The reason they won is because of the trades that Alex Anthopoulos made in the end of July to get their team a lineup that could compete. And what happens when you have guys that are veteran players that can go up to bat and really make the opposing pitchers grind, the opposing staff, it just wears them down. If they always have to make good pitches and you have veteran players, then it just makes them be that much more fine for that much, like for that longer, you know. I mean, like they have to be really good for a long time to beat this team. And this team just came together. I mean, Duvall's never played better than he has in a Braves uniform. He's gone all over. He hasn't had as much success, but every time he's in a Braves uniform, he's just, lights out. So just a lot of guys, a lot of guys contributed, but the reason they won this World Series is because of the outfield. I mean, they lost Acuna earlier in the year, and everybody's like, all right, this just isn't going to be our year. They were up and down. They weren't a playoff team, and then all of a sudden it just flip flopped, and they just went on a roll and didn't ever look back.
So obviously, from watching everything play out, and as Gordon Beckham describes there, those trades were vital to the Atlanta Braves becoming World Series champions. Those guys all stepped up throughout the playoffs, also down the stretch in the second half. They put themselves in a position to win the NL East and go on that run. And hats off to Atlanta for a Cinderella run to a World Series championship. A lot of times it takes luck, and I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just mean it takes everything falling into place exactly the right way to go on one of these runs to win a World Series. We saw in 2015 additions like Kelly Johnson and Juan Uribe, who, if you look at the numbers, weren't the biggest of acquisitions, but just having those stable veterans come in and make an impact, it really can take your team to another level. And so you look at what the Mets did at the deadline and you say, why didn't they get Adam Duvall? Why didn't they get Jorge Soler? And all these different moves that the Braves made. And really, I think it's kind of shocking to look at how little it took for the Braves to microwave, as I said earlier, a World Series contender. It happened quickly, but it's because their foundation was so solid that they were able to plug in a piece here, a piece there, and find their way. But just to go through all the trades, Jock Peterson comes first for prospect Bryce Ball. Now, Ball was the number 15 prospect in the Braves farm system, guy who has a lot of pop, 30 home runs in his first 169 minor league games, 39 doubles, 2 triples, career 482 slugging percentage in the minor leagues. So that was his tool that the Cubs bought into, but not a prospect that is anything crazy. This is still a player the Mets could have theoretically had if they were willing to trade for a Jock Peterson, but the Mets were betting on a Dominic Smith. They were betting on Michael Conforto coming off the hamstring injury. And honestly, based on their careers, the Mets were making bets that at the time made sense, but ultimately a player like Peterson, a player like Jorge Soler, Eddie Rosario, all those guys ended up coming together in the second half and helping the Braves get to where they ultimately did on the top of the mountain there as World Series champions. But you go through the other trades. Jorge Soler, the eventual World Series MVP, was had for Casey Kallick, a fourth round pick in 2019. Lottery ticket type arm, a reliever, throws hard, really good slider, struck out nearly 25% of the batters in high A prior to getting traded. So that was a nice little piece. Again, could the Mets have maybe got Soler? Sure. But at the time, Jorge Soler was not the Jorge Soler that was winning a World Series MVP. He is hitting 192. He had a 79 WRC plus, which means he was 21% worse than the league average hitter. Not necessarily a player that would have got Mets fans excited at the time. There's this revisionist history that all of these guys were what they became when they were traded for, but that's not exactly the case. Although some of these trades are ridiculous, particularly the Eddie Rosario deal, where the Braves gave up Pablo Sandoval, who was immediately cut. So a straight salary dump by Cleveland, take on a smaller salary in Sandoval to mitigate the loss. The Braves would have had to cut Sandoval anyway to add Rosario to their roster. So that is how that trade works out. They basically get him for free, just have to pay his salary. And Rosario puts up a 133 WRC plus in the second half, or after the deadline, I should say. 33% better than your league average hitter. He hit 271, 330 on base, 573 slugging percentage, and was great throughout the playoffs. Adam Duvall was had for Alex Jackson. Alex Jackson, for his career as a backup catcher, a 132 hitter with a 468 OPS. Clearly not a player that really is valued to such an extent that you would get a player. Now Duvall hit a bunch of home runs and has been great whenever he's put on a Braves uniform, and even had 22 home runs with the Marlins earlier on in the season. But when you really look at it all, Adam Duvall, 277 on base percentage prior to being traded. Eddie Rosario, 685 OPS. Soler already mentioned the low batting average, the low WRC plus. Jock Peterson was hitting 230 with a 300 on base, a 418 slugging, a 90 WRC plus. Again, a below average overall player up to that point when he got traded. At the end of the day, it was the fact that the Braves had belief top down that they were going to win the NL East. They never wavered from that. They had proven winners like Freddie Freeman, who was able to take that team along with Austin Riley, who really came into his own. They found a way to win. And you look at what those guys did, right? Austin Riley at 327, 361 on base, 540 slugging, a 137 WRC plus down the stretch after the deadline. 37% better than your league average hitter. Freddie Freeman, 323 average, 385 on base, 502 slugging, 134 WRC plus. He had 8 home runs. Riley had 11. Ozzie Albies had 13. Dansby Swanson had 9. Yes, they got 29 home runs from Jorge Soler and Eddie Rosario. But at the end of the day, it was the combination of all of those guys that made them champions. You look at what the Mets did, and it's not like the production from the deadline acquisitions was that different. In fact, if you just go based on wins above replacement, the Mets deadline acquisitions were more valuable than the Braves deadline acquisitions. So as I alluded to before, Javier Baez, statistically, maybe the best trade deadline acquisition anybody made. He had 299, 371 on base, 515 slugging, a 143 WRC plus, 43% better than your league average hitter. His F4 was 1.7. If you combine Peterson, Duvall, Rosario, Soler, their F4s come out to 2.9. You want to throw in Trevor Williams and Rich Hill on top of what Baez did, it's a combined 3.3 F4. So if you look at the trade deadline acquisitions alone, on paper, the Mets had the better deadline. Now, when you look at the collective, obviously the Braves did because they came together as a team. They won a ton of games. The Mets just folded. But my point is, as we sit here and everyone just wants to yell at something, everybody just wants to get mad and point fingers. It's his fault. It's Zach Scott's fault. Sandy Alderson, Steve Cohen, Luis Rojas, all these different. No, like, let's pull back for a second and realize that at the end of the day, it's a collective, it's a team sport. And the Mets as a team were not as good as the Atlanta Braves. They, time and again, early in the season, as I mentioned before, would just shrug off not getting that final game if they were trying to sweep a Miami Marlins, or they would split a doubleheader and say, yeah, a lot of times you only get one, it's fine. But those wins add up. There was an opportunity in the first half when the Braves were struggling to find that identity, when they didn't have all these different pieces pulling in the right direction, where they were a team that couldn't put together a single month where they were more than one game over 500 until that trade deadline. Through all of that, the Mets had their chances to get an 11-game lead in the division. You think if the Mets were leading the division by 11, 12 games, that the Braves and Alex Anthopoulos would have said, "Yeah, let's go out and let's take on Eddie Rosario's salary. You think he gets that past ownership? Let's just take on this guy's bloated salary who isn't having a good year because I think maybe we can catch the Mets that are 12 games ahead of us." No chance. As much as the Mets lost this division in the second half, they also lost it in the first half by not forming that legitimate championship identity. At the end of the day, the Mets in the first half, while they were a first place team, they were not playing baseball like the Brewers, like the Dodgers and the Giants, these other teams that were going out, that were sweeping series, that were putting a huge margin between themselves and the teams that were trying to chase them. And if you can get that mental edge, that will build and that will snowball. But the Mets never had that. And there was always that "we'll get them tomorrow" attitude until guess what? There is no tomorrow. You're losing all of these games in the second half, complete collapse. And the Braves end up not only supplanting you in the division, but take that opportunity, grab a hold of it, and win a World Series. So then you look at moving forward, what does this mean? Do the Mets have to completely shake up everything and trade everyone? No, that's not necessarily the case. But whether it is an identity crisis of needing to get a leader that comes in, that commands the room, that can play that Freddie Freeman-esque role and can get everyone else to fall in line, whether it is the matter of getting the right manager or just the right couple of moves this offseason, maybe pulling the right piece or two out of that locker room. If Jeff McNeil doesn't get along with Francisco Lindor and you're now building a team in his image, as much as I love Jeff McNeil, as much as I think Jeff McNeil is going to have a huge bounce back year next year, maybe you're going to have to make a hard trade for the better of the team as a collective. But we have to remember that it's a team sport and it doesn't come down to one trade, one signing, one addition here or there. It's about building a winning identity. And whatever has been going on with the Atlanta Braves my entire lifetime, they have found a way, top to bottom, to continuously win. And as much as we want to talk about the World Series drought, and there's Mets fans out there that just opine about, I just want to see that first World Series since '86. And trust me, I've never seen one. Of course, I would love nothing more than to hop on a podcast this time next year and be celebrating a Mets World Series. Nothing would bring me more joy. But you know what? I really want more than a World Series. I just want the Mets to contend every single year. Right now, if you told me that the Mets could win one magical season like the Nationals did in 2019, and then they would suck for the next 6 years, or they could, for the next decade, win like 6 or 7 division titles, and every single summer, I got to have a ton of fun talking about the New York Mets and reacting to great victories night in, night out, month in, month out. That is what you want, at least personally. That's what I want to see. I want to see a Mets team that can not hang division banners because you want to be good enough where that doesn't matter, but can win the division time and again, can prove that the Braves don't just own the East, can go into a trade deadline and instead of looking at a Braves team making moves and saying, why are they doing that? We're in first place. They can be 12 or 13 games up. There won't be other teams trying to make moves. And if they are, they can say, that's cute. We're just going to reel off more wins in the second half, and you're going to be upset that you blew those prospects. That is what you want to get to. And hopefully, right now, the best part about all of this, and something that we might talk about in the coming days and weeks with Locked On Mets here, hopefully, Steve Cohen is as frustrated as all of you, because what that could mean is the Mets might spend stupid money this offseason. And sometimes you say you don't want them to spend stupid money. Just spill all over the place. Just bring in all the free agents. That doesn't always work. But if you can pay the tax bill, it certainly gives your team a better chance when you don't necessarily have that talent coming up in the minor leagues right now that will turn this into a contender overnight. What you have to do is make the right moves, not only on paper, but in the clubhouse, build a winning identity from day one and realize it is not a sprint, it's a marathon. And you don't let a team like the Braves sneak up on you ever again. Or at least hopefully you don't, and hopefully not next season, because I cannot watch 2 years that end up playing out the way this one did. Anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. On tomorrow's show, a crossover with Locked On A's. I'll be talking to Jason Burke about Matt Chapman. Hot stove season is here. The off season, a glorious time where the Mets can't lose any games. We will get to a ton of fun stuff throughout this time. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On MLB. Sully has you covered for everything going on throughout the offseason. And I'm sure he's still reacting to the final game of this season with the Braves winning the World Series. So if you want to check that out, you can follow Locked On MLB wherever you get podcasts.